Hello, everyone. My name is Dui Zhou, a PhD candidate at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Guangzhou. I'm fortunate to be supervised by Professor Harry Sham and Professor Leno Ni. In this video, I will be sharing an AI-generated podcast about our latest paper, MAGI, Taming Teacher Forcing from Masked Autoregressive Video Generation. If you are interested in our work, please feel free to connect with me. I would love to hear your thoughts. Let's listen to it.
Okay, let's dive in. We're zeroing in today on some really interesting progress in video generation.
Yeah, specifically looking at this new framework, MAGI. MAGI.
Right, from that paper, Taming Teacher Forcing for Masked Autoregressive Video Generation.
Exactly.
And our mission really is to unpack how this MAGI thing works, how it gets us, more stable, more coherent, and crucially, longer videos.
Right, because that length and coherence, that's been a real sticking point.
And it often comes back to this technique used in training, teacher forcing, right?
Teacher forcing. Sounds helpful on the surface.
Yeah, like you're guiding the model, showing it the correct next step like a teacher would. But you're saying it gets tricky with video.
It really does, especially when you're predicting frame by frame. See, in training, with traditional teacher forcing, the model always sees the actual previous frame, the ground truth.
Okay, makes sense so far.
But then when it's time to actually generate a video, at inference time.
Wow, it doesn't have that ground truth anymore.
Exactly. It has to predict the next frame based on the frame it just made up.
Which might not be perfect.
Right, could have errors. And that creates this big gap between how it learned and what it actually needs to do.
The training inference gap.
Right.
Okay. It's like practicing tennis serves with a perfect ball machine, then playing a match where the opponent hits weird spin shots you've never seen.
That's a good analogy, yeah. And that gap means errors pile up fast. Video coherence, especially motion, just falls apart as the sequence gets longer.
People tried fixing this before, right? The paper mentions masked teacher forcing, MTF.
Yeah, MTF tried masking parts of the previous frames during training. A step in the right direction maybe, but still didn't fully solve that core mismatch.
So MAGI, how does it bridge this gap? This sounds like the key innovation.
It really is. They introduced something called complete teacher forcing, CTF.
Complete teacher forcing, okay.
So instead of feeding masked versions of past frames, we're only relying on its own, possibly wonky outputs during training. CTF conditions on complete real observation frames from the actual data.
Wait, so complete frames, not masked?
Yeah.
Even during training?
Yes, that's the core idea. It drastically reduces that training inference mismatch. The model learns much more effectively how to generate sequences that actually hang together.
And the paper shows this works.
Oh yeah, the results are pretty clear. Just using CTF gives a big boost, like a plus 23% improvement in FVD scores compared to the older MTF method.
FVD scores, remind us, that's a key metric for video quality.
Precisely. Measures realism and motion consistency. So higher improvement means much better video, more realistic flow.
Okay, so CTF is a big piece, but you mentioned getting very long sequences. Is CTF enough on its own for that?
Not quite. You still bump into other issues like exposure bias and error accumulation over really long stretches.
Exposure bias. Yeah. That's where the model gets too comfortable with the perfect training data, right? And then kind of freaks out when it has to rely on its own less than perfect generated frames.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. So to handle that, MAGI adds two dynamic training strategies.
Okay, what are they?
Dynamic interval training and dynamic noise injection.
Dynamic interval, like showing it frames spaced further apart sometimes.
Exactly. Forces it to learn connections over longer time spans, handle different speeds of motion.
And then dynamic noise, just adding noise.
Yeah, adding a little bit of randomness to the input frames during training. It kind of makes the model tougher, more robust to the small errors that inevitably happen during actual generation.
Okay, so it's the combo. CTF tackles the main training inference gap.
Right.
And these dynamic strategies handle the exposure bias and build robustness for longer sequences.
You got it. The ablation studies in the paper actually confirm this. Take away either the dynamic intervals or the noise, and the performance drops. They work together.
And the results they got are, well, pretty eye-popping. Generating over 100 frames from models trained on just 16 frame sequences.
That's, I think, the most striking part. It shows it can generalize way beyond what it saw in training. Think about that train on maybe a second of video, generate something, 6, 7 times longer, and it's coherent.
Wow.
Plus, they use KV cache. which is a nice practical touch for efficiency.
KV cache. That speeds up generation by reusing calculations, right?
Yeah, basically. Super important when you're generating hundreds of frames.
Yeah.
Keeps things from taking forever.
So pulling it all together, what does this MAGI approach mean for you listening?
Well, we're seeing these autoregressive models get much, much better at video. Thanks to ideas like CTF and these dynamic training tricks, they're not just making short clips anymore. They're generating longer, coherent scenes and doing it efficiently.
And why does that matter? Generating long, coherent video. Well, you can imagine the possibilities, right? Much more dynamic visual content, maybe for entertainment, education, simulations.
Or even building better world models for AI. Agents that need to understand how things change and move over longer timescales.
It really makes you think. If models can now reliably predict, say, over 100 frames from just 16 frames of training data, keeping things coherent.
Right, maintaining that motion plausibility.
What kind of new creative tools does that unlock? Or on the AI side, what kind of interactive world models could we build that truly grasp the dynamics of change over time?
Exactly. It opens up some really significant possibilities to consider.